Hello, Maniacs, and welcome back to another episode of Cult Classic Mania. I'm your host, Matthew, and this episode is brought to you by CultCelebrities.com, the internet's weirdest resources for all B-movies and cult films. Lastly, I'd like to remind you guys that I'll be switching to a bi-weekly schedule after the April 29th episode, so if you are looking forward to an episode every Monday, don't, because it will be a bi-weekly schedule. That's all I got for you this week. Enjoy this episode of The Toxic Avenger, directed by the one and only Lloyd Kaufman from 1986.
We come in peace.
Hey, fuck ass, give me a beer!
Yeah, welcome back to the cinema. This is not for the typical. Time to feed the occipital lobe with the films that I call my home. Buckle up, settle in, we'll be breaking down a bit. Got a new take, make an old film relevant. But to give attention to the unsung revenants of the film industry, that's a wrap, let's riff.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Cult Classic Mania.
Hello, Maniacs, and welcome back to another episode of Cult Classic Mania, a podcast dedicated to the low-budget disasters that we all know and love. Not all of them are low-budget, but they definitely can be disasters. I'm your host, Matthew, and this week we are talking about the legendary Toxic Avenger from 1986, directed by the, of course, legendary Lloyd Kaufman. This episode is sort of a special one, as it's sort of, it's not really the celebration of the Avengers End Game film, but it's sort of like the crossover that you didn't want, or the crossover that doesn't need to exist whatsoever. And we're doing sort of an Avengers Podgame with a bunch of other podcasts, and they're going to do the rest of the Toxic series as well. But I jumped right on this goddamn thing and said, hey, I want to fucking do Toxic Avenger 1, because that's like my brainchild for horror, and I fucking love this franchise in general, but I wanted to do one, but the rest of the guys, it looks like our new friends over at Gorelords podcast, they're doing Toxic Avenger 2 on 4/23. Our network friends over at Slashers, they are doing Toxic Avenger 3 on 4/24. And our new friends, Terror Trio, is doing Citizen Toxie on 4/24. And of course, our other network friends, Copulators Die First, they will be covering the Toxic Avenger cartoon, which is the Toxic Crusaders, and it looks like that episode will be released on 4/29. But yeah, it's a crossover that you didn't want nor need, but fucking deal with it anyway. If you feel like following the show, you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter at CCMPod. You can follow us on Instagram at Cult Classic Mania. And if you feel like supporting us monetarily, you can go ahead and do so by going to patreon.com/Cult Classic Mania. Let's go ahead and dive right into the amazingly disgusting world of trauma that we all know and love. The Toxic Avenger is directed by Michael Hers and Lloyd Kaufman, who are known for the movies Class of Nuke 'Em High franchise, Toxic Avenger, Romeo and Juliet, Terra Firma, Poltergeist, many, many more movies. I highly recommend, if you guys have never heard of either of these two, go ahead and check their films out. You won't be disappointed. And before going more into the Toxic Avenger, I should forewarn you guys that there are a lot of suggestive themes in this film. There's a depiction of rape. There's, of course, murder, like in every trauma film. But it's just, if rape is triggering for you, I really don't recommend watching any trauma films, really. And it's just overall disgusting. If you're really queasy about gore, I really don't recommend watching any trauma films. But if you're wanting to dive deeper into horror, I really recommend checking out any Lloyd Kaufman films. But of course, Toxic Avenger is written by Lloyd Kaufman as well. And Joe Ritter, who is known mostly for the Toxic Avenger franchise. And he's mostly known as the camera guy, I guess. I didn't know this. He has worked on a fuckload of movies. Like, this guy has the most diverse career, and I have no clue who he is because he's a cameraman. But he's mostly known for the films Maniac Cop 2, Dr. Giggles, fucking Wayne's World 2, and Pulp Fiction, apparently. And it's fucking incredible. Like most trauma films, there aren't a whole lot of notable actors or actresses. And if there are notable ones, it's usually ones that have worked in previous trauma films. So there's a lot of crossover from there. But the Toxic Avenger is starring Andre Miranda, who is known for Toxic Avenger 1 and a film called Two Top Bananas. Mitch Cohen, who's known for Clerks, and he was in Toxic Avenger 1 as well. Jennifer Baptist, who is known for Goodbye New York, Class of Nuke 'Em High, and Toxic Avenger 1, as well as Cindy Mannion, who is known for a film called Blowout, Preppies, and the trauma documentary, as well as Toxic Avenger 1. Mark Togel, who is known for Return to Nukem High Volume 2, Toxie, the franchise, and the first Turn On, which is a sexploitation film that Lloyd Kaufman did. And The Toxic Avenger was released April 11th, 1986 on a budget of $475,000. And it's just a little bit more than the budget from Halloween, which was from 1978. And this is fucking crazy to me because the budget for the original Halloween is $325,000. So, thinking that, and Lloyd spent a little bit more than John Carpenter did whenever he was doing the original Halloween. It just blows my mind for some reason. If you didn't know what the film was about, Toxic Avenger is taking place in Tromaville, New Jersey, where a nerdy janitor who works at the local health club, he is taken on by a group of meatheads. They pull an awful prank on him and causing him to fall out of a third-story window into what happens to be a barrel of toxic waste, slowly causing this 90-pound nerd to turn into what we know as the Toxic Avenger superhero. They kind of have the gist of what the Toxic Avenger is about. Let's go ahead and dive right into, the segment already. I don't need to tell you.
Trivia time.
That's right, the segment that you're sick and tired of, trivia time. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a whole lot of trivia that I found noteworthy or interesting, really. But one very New York City-like trivia that I did find is while shooting in Shinbone Alley, a homeless man ended up stealing a prop gun from one of the trailers, and they threatened to kill the crew, basically, with a fake prop gun. And that is the most New York or New Jersey thing I've ever read for any type of a shooting for a film. And, all the musicians and actors and actresses that came out of New York in the 80s talk about how great of the place New York was, and I find that hard to believe. Even bands like Cro-Mags, I love the Cro-Mags, they're from New York, and the vocalist John Joseph, he's from New York as well. And he was telling a story on the Joe Rogan Experience, I believe it was, where he was hanging out with Bad Brains one day because he always hung out with them. And they were just hanging out at the squat house, and they're practicing or whatever. And apparently some guy ran in and stole the bag of weed, whenever they were practicing, and then the guy just runs out, talks. And John Joseph just talks up about how great New York was in the 80s. And I've seen pictures of the 80s in New York, and, New York looked fucking disgusting and vile. I don't know what John Joseph's definition of amazing is, but I can assure you that is not my definition of amazing. And New York just looked fucking vile in the 80s, and I would not want to live there. And this next one is kind of a spoiler for a scene later on. But there's an incident where a kid has his head crushed from a car, and the violent-looking crushing of the head in the movie was accomplished by injecting a melon with corn syrup and red food dye. A wig was placed on the melon, and it was fitted onto a dummy. Though cheap, the effect is highly unsettling, and I cannot agree more. That effect is so fucking gross. Especially the red dye effect. Whenever they added that, and I had to rewind it back to check it. And I'm even though that's just a watermelon, it's fucking disgusting that they decided to do it that way. It's very unsettling, and they show it and they zoom in on his face, so you can't really miss it, honestly. According to Mitch Cohen himself, during the filming of the scene where they're fighting Cigarface and his gang is in Shinbone Alley, and again, another homeless man walked up to him and offered him a drink, believing he was a genuine homeless burn victim. I guarantee you that's probably the same homeless man that threatened them with a gun days before that. You guys remember the sheep that Melvin had to kiss during that prank? Well, the sheep, according to Mark Torgel, he had to kiss was infested with lice, but apparently he did not find out until later on after the scene was shot. So there's that, I guess. After going behind the scenes on Rocky from 1976, Lloyd Kaufman decided to make a movie in a health club with his friend Michael Hers. After reading a magazine article with the headline, "Horror Film is Dead," Troma decided to change it into a horror movie, and the film's working title was actually Health Club, and lobby cards bearing this title can be viewed in the Troma's website, actually, at least in the early days it was. Now that little segment is out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into the film, shall we?
The Toxic Avenger. He's a different kind of hero.
Now, the Toxic Avenger starts out with the voiceover that doesn't really have any bearing on the story whatsoever, except for the last half of it. And we get an opening with the voiceover of a man saying, "New York City, the world capital of culture and industry. Here among the towering skyscrapers, civilization is guided by men of progress and the wonders of technology. But for all of this industrial advancement, there is a price to pay: pollution, the unavoidable byproduct of today's society. Every year, millions of gallons of poison is wasted, and garbage and radioactive chemicals are disposed of nearby towns, such as a town called Tromaville with a population of 15,000, the toxic waste capital of the world. Our story takes place at the Tromaville Health Club, where a young man named Melvin works. Melvin's entire his entire life was changed by the toxic chemical waste. Now, if you live in a town that is literally the toxic chemical waste capital of the world, just fucking move. Like, why are you living in a town filled with literal chemical waste? Like, just New York City is like not that far from where they're supposed to be, because it's literally just New Jersey. Like, just fucking move. Before going into this next scene, I will say that while I do love trauma films, a lot of the films don't have a whole much of a story there. Like, I just love trauma films for the pure insanity of what their films are. But what I love about The Toxic Avenger is there's actually a story here, and there's continuity, well, sort of continuity throughout the film. I can't give it too much credit, but to its certainty, there's continuity. But it's really fun to watch, because it's sort of like where Lloyd was like honing in on his craft as a director, and he really wanted to try to kind of make an impression on people, and it sort of shows. I don't know, it's just the Toxic Avenger franchise in general just has a different feel to it compared to his other franchises or his other films, because again, a lot of his other films are just batshit crazy. It's like an hour and a half to 2 hours of just shit, blood, cum, piss, and whatever else in between that he can sort of add in there to add that little shock value to sort of piss you off but make you think, holy shit, this is fucking insane. But more on that later. But we get a Toxic Avenger title card and an opening sequence that is seriously one of the most 80s intros ever to any film ever. And everyone is coked out and lifting weights at max capacity. Everyone's in like really tight spandex. There's even women wearing bikinis for some reason. I wonder if they really dress like that in the 80s whenever they go to the gym. I'm honestly curious. Well, no, I really don't want to know, because like they're all coked out, they're all smoking cigarettes and whatever. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Melvin, who's played by Mark Torgel, and the rest of the guys and girls who pick on him. Julie, who's played by Cindy Mannion, Bozo, who is Gary Snyder, Slug, who is Robert Pritchard, and Wanda, who is Jennifer Baptist. Melvin, for some reason, doesn't know how to mop whenever they're showing him for the first time, and accidentally misses the mop bucket to dip it back in and dips it into the hot tub instead. And this is when everybody else yells at him, and his boss yells at him that the toilets stink and then he needs to clean them up. Gang jumps out and picks on him some more, and Bozo is so coked out at this point. Like, he seems like he's coked out in every scene, because he's like, I'm so fucking stressed out, he's killing my karma, Julie. You gotta do something about this kid, man. He's stressing me the fuck out. Like, dude, he's not stressing you out. You know what's stressing you out? You sniffing coke off of Julie's tits for every scene. But that's none of my business. Just fucking do what you gotta do, because it's 80s and everybody does coke. And they're working out, and they cut to the scene where they're working out. Julie, Bozo, Slug, and Wanda. Wanda and Slug, they end up going off to sneak off to have sex in the locker room, and Wanda asks if it's okay that they do it here. Slug is such a gentleman and reassures her that it is okay, because he paid one of the workers there $15 to have the entire place to himself for the next morning. And this is when we learn that Slug and Bozo like to hit people with their cars. And they make a little fun game out of it, and it's really racist, and they like to kill people, apparently. So there's that. We get a terrible sex scene soon after. Melvin walks in on them creepily and watches them fuck, and Slug tells him to piss off pervert, and Wanda also threatens to kill him with a knife. So there's that. It cuts to Bozo and the gang. They are drunk driving around later that night. And this is when we learn about the car hitting game as Julie goes over the rules. And now these rules are very offensive, so I'm going to try to give a more PC version of the rules because they are really racist at this point. So forewarning for that. There's a point for Jews. If you hit a Jew, that's 1 point. African Americans and Asians, they are 20 points if you hit them. And Puerto Ricans are 30 points. Kids under 12 is double of all those total points. And while she's explaining the rules, it cuts to a boy on a bike going for his nightly ride, as Julie explains this, and they have to kill the kids, not just graze them, because Bozo's like, well, do I actually have to kill those kids? I think he's kind of apprehensive about it, but Julie tells him no, he's got to kill the kid. And Bozo, he notices the kid on his bike soon after, and he asks Julie how much for hitting the kid on the bike. She says 20 points if he hits the bike and the kid. So Bozo, he goes full throttle on the gas and hits him straight on. Wanda looks back behind her and she mentions that he's still alive, and so Bozo, he backs his car up again full throttle and runs over him again. So soon after this, Julie and Wanda, after they all said and done, Julie and Wanda run out to take Polaroids of the dead kid apparently. There's a random cut back to the health club with Slug, and he's playing a prank on the aerobics class that is going on, and he pranks the instructor by putting a snake down his shirt, and then it cuts back with Bozo and the gang, and they're playing racquetball as Melvin creepily watches them as he's washing the windows for some reason. Julie mentions that she has a plan to get back at Melvin for what he did earlier. And Julie is talking to Melvin, saying that he should help her with the problem and to meet with her in the locker room later that night. And meanwhile, this is when the toxic waste truck pulls into Tromaville with two idiots driving, and the driver partner mentions that he has some really good dope, and they pull over to he pulls out an obvious fake bag of coke, and they start snorting, and they want to pull over and snort it. And I should mention that these are the most reckless cargo drivers ever, because the toxic waste, the barrels are literally open fully. There's no coverings on them. There's no lids. There's nothing to protect it from anything. And it's just spilling out everywhere for some reason. And this is when Melvin is back at the girls' locker room waiting for Julie. This is when the prank is going on. And the prank is that she wants to hook up with Melvin while Melvin is wearing a tutu. Except Melvin goes down to the pool area and all the lights are off. Melvin mentions how soft Julie is at this point whenever he's getting down closer to Julie. And you hear a voice say, okay, turn the lights on, Julie. And it's actually a sheep that Melvin is holding. And it's dressed up in women's clothing. And everyone starts laughing at him. And they're chasing after him through the health club until Melvin jumps out of a third-story window. Unfortunately, the toxic waste truck is just happened to be parked right in front of the health club, and Melvin falls directly into the barrels of toxic waste. Melvin's skin is starting to burn from the waste, and Julie mentions that he doesn't look so good, and Bozo, his coked out brain, he's like, Melvin's faking it, man, and he really fucking stinks if he can't take a fucking joke, Julie. Like, come on, man, I'm fucking stressed out from all the coke, god damn it.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
This is when two police officers, they break up the crowd, and they actually try to help Melvin. The cops are the only two decent people at this point, but one of them, he leans down to pick Melvin up. This somehow causes him to catch on fire, and then causing Melvin to catch on fire. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. And he's back at his mother's house with his skin melting as he's drawing a bath and just burning into what is known as Toxie. And it's so annoying because it'll keep cutting back to Melvin and his mother. And his mother was just like, are you doing okay, Melvin? It's like, are you okay? And he's literally screaming bloody murder. Like, of course he's not fucking okay. He's melting in a bathtub full of toxic waste. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And whenever he's turning into Toxie, it's really gross. It honestly is. And like, the effects are disgusting. His skin is like boiling and popping up. There's like boils and like it looks like pus is like greenish pus is like coming out of his arm and breaking out from the waist. And his hair is falling out and his face is like deforming. and he eventually turns into the Toxic Avenger. And after a sigh of relief, after he's he's done turning into Toxie, his mom is like, and you hear a sigh, and his mom is like, "Oh boy, my little Melvin, he's finally hit puberty," hinting at that he came for the first time. I don't really fucking know. It's weird. I don't want to go into it. And then it cuts to Toxie running through a field. Mind you, all of this happens within probably the first 20 minutes of the film. Like in good Trauma fashion, everything is going at light speed, and they hit you with all the details immediately. That's another thing that I enjoy about Trauma films. They give you all the necessary information. They don't give you any filler bullshit that doesn't matter. There's a little bit of comedic relief. Well, other than that, he just goes right for the punches. And we're meeting the three, presumably drug dealers at this point, you could probably guess, known as Cigar Face, who is played by Dan Snow, Knuckles, who is played by Doug Esquebec, and Nipples, who is played by Charles Lee Jr., as Cigar Face is counting a stack of cash, which is honestly just a stack of ones, and he only counts out $15, and it's not much at all, about how they're going to bribe the security officer, who is Officer O'Clancy, played by Dick Martin. And Knuckles says, "You don't take the dough, I'm gonna give you the blow." And this guy whenever he says that, it fucking sounds like Patrick Star from SpongeBob. He's not menacing whatsoever. And then the officer, he doesn't take the money after they try to bribe him, and the gang jumps him soon after that. Cigar Face burns the cigar on the cop's forehead, saying, "This is why they call me Cigar Face in the first place." After everyone gets their shot on the cop falls down. Cigar Face has a gun pointed at his penis for some reason, and this is when Toxie jumps in to save the day. There's a funny gag where Cigar Face is trying to fight Toxie, and it sounds like he's using Toxie is using his face as like one of those punchable boxing bags, and there's just those little silly gags throughout every Trauma film that I personally enjoy. That little comedic touch, and they had the sound effect. They have the sound effect with it as well. And eventually, Toxie smashes Knuckles and Nipples' heads in, and they fall down. And Toxie finishes them off by smashing their face in with two mops, and that's like his signature move. He does that to everybody that he kills. And Cigar Face is so scared that he just runs away. After all is said and done, Toxie helps up the officer, and there's a obvious Toxie voice overdubbed, and he says to the officer, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I don't know what came over me, I just couldn't control myself. I've never done anything like this before." And whenever the cop is talking to Toxie, because in the beginning, whenever he's talking to the three drug dealers, he's talking with a normal English accent, but for some reason he just turns into a Scottish guy, and he just totally breaks character. A great actor to begin with, because during the fighting, whenever Toxie is fighting all the drug dealers, it will cut to random facial reactions. Like, remember Samurai Cop, whenever it would just cut to Mark Fraser just doing the stupidest facial reactions. That's what O'Clancy is doing at this point. And it's just every time Toxie does something amazing and beats the shit out of the drug dealers, it'll just cut to his dumb breaking in the fourth wall facial reactions. It's so fucking stupid, and clearly this guy can't act, and that's why he didn't do anything else after this. And after all this is happening, there's a press conference at the jail as a nurse is helping stitch up O'Clancy. The press is eating up the news about Toxie. Mayor Pete Belgoody, who is played by Pat Ryan, he is apparently known as the fat guy that plays in all the early 80s films, and he was also in Street Trash, and I think he played Frank, I believe that's who it was. Yeah, Frank Snizer. He played in Street Trash, but anyway, everyone is briefing the mayor on the Toxie case and what is going on with O'Clancy and what he witnessed. This is when we learn about the drug dealers. Apparently, they work with the mayor, and the mayor gets a cut of the drug dealers' pay or whatever the rounds that they make. And I should mention that all of the people that the mayor works with, there's one guy that's a sergeant, and he's for some reason a German Nazi, and every time he leaves the room, he salutes with the Hitler salute, and it's really offensive, and I'm not entirely sure why it was added, but he added it anyway. And it cuts to the health club again with Wanda. She's getting ready to get in the sauna, and Slug sneaks up behind her, pretending to be a ghost. This is sort of like they do a callback to this joke later on. Toxie is back at his mother's house to surprise her about him turning into Toxie for some reason, and his mother is played by Sarah Bell Livingston, and she does not respond well and screams and shuts the door on Melvin. There's an annoying montage of Toxie at the toxic waste site as he's moping around and making his new home. I'm not entirely sure why they felt they need to show this to us, but we are back at the mayor's house where he and are sitting down with Tom Wrightson, who is played by Al Pia, and talking about the zoning board's decision to delegate the old Ron's chemical plant as the new toxic waste site. And this is also where Toxie happens to live now. We cut to a Mexican restaurant where 3 robbers come in, who are Rico, who is played by Michael Russo, Leroy, who's played by Patrick Kilpatrick, and Frank, who is played by Larry Sutton. And they want to rob the place, apparently, because out of every place in town, you decided to pick the Mexican restaurant for some reason. And I'm pretty sure this is the same restaurant that was used in Poltergeist, because the kitchen looked exactly like the one in Poltergeist. And Leroy is sexually harassing one of the underage girls at the restaurant, and a man, he stands up saying that Leroy should let everyone go. He will be the hostage, just don't do anything else. Leroy ends up killing him, and Frank notices that there's a blind girl across the room, and he decides to sexually harass her at this point. The dog barks as Frank gets closer to her, and Frank tells Leroy to shoot the dog. Honestly, this entire scene at this point is really difficult to watch, and it's pretty triggering to me, honestly. And Frank, he proceeds to try and rape the blind girl, but luckily Toxie jumps in to save the day. Toxie fucks everyone up in the room, all the bad guys at least, and he rips Frank's arm off, and everyone runs out of the restaurant. Quite reasonable reaction, honestly. And Leroy jumps up and tries to fight Toxie, but of course Toxie fucks him up. And this is when Rico then tries to fight Toxie again. As he's fighting Rico, Leroy sneaks up behind him with some type of, I think it's a soda tank, I'm assuming, but Toxie chokes him out by pouring milk down his throat and basically creating a chocolate sundae and using a blender through him, like shoving the blender through his mouth all the way through his head. And Toxie burns Rico and the greasers and tosses Frank in the oven. Toxie goes over to check on Sarah, which I forgot to mention, she is the blind girl, and she's played by Andre Miranda, and she needs help getting home because Leroy presumably killed her dog. And there's an unnecessary love interest / montage of Toxie walking her back to the house. Meanwhile, the police are investigating what happened at the restaurant. It cuts to Toxie at Sarah's house, and Sarah wants to touch his face, but Toxie doesn't agree to it. He says that he has really bad acne, is a terrible cover-up. Sarah is apparently okay with this answer, and she wants to read Melvin's fortune by reading his palms. Says that on his left palm, good things are coming to him in the future. On his right palm, I believe it was, he's going to be an important man. There's a hard cut to a lecture / conference with a Dr. Snodberger, who is played by Reuben Gus, who says Toxie was created by toxic waste, and that no one should fear him unless if you are evil, because he only attacks the evil. We are back at the health club where Toxie runs into fuck up the mayor's drug dealer by smashing the leg extension weights onto his face and pegging him with the leg extension peg down onto his face. Before this, they show the drug dealer making his normal rounds around the health club because he sells an array of drugs. He sells, I think, steroids. He sells weed. I think at one point he brought out a little thing of coke and snorts some coke. And then he goes off to do his exercises because, again, everyone in the 80s apparently does coke for some reason. And he finishes off the drug dealer by using his signature move by smashing a mop on his face. And Wanda is getting the sauna ready to go, and Toxie, he sneaks up on her like the same way that Slug did earlier, and Toxie, he ends up burning her ass on the hot rocks, and he says this shitty one-liner, and says, "Let this be a lesson to you, you hot ass," as he kills her off. We get a cut to Toxie peeing out toxic waste in an alleyway, as a limo pulls up, and there's this really fucked up scene where a father is trying to pimp out his 12-year-old daughter, to Toxie, and Toxie, again, he's like, this guy's a creep, and I'm just going to kill him, and he ends up fighting him off, and a bunch of random guys just happen to run out of the limo and start to try to fight him, and this is when Bozo and Slug are on the prowl again. They do a hard cut to him, and with their fucked up murder game again, and they see if they try to, this is whenever sort of like a montage of Toxie just doing good things for the community and saving people. And they see two kids playing in the street and go full speed towards the kids. Toxie, he jumps in at the right time and saves them. He also helps an old lady cross the street with her groceries. For some reason, he helps the lady in her kitchen by opening a jar of popcorn for her, and saves someone's baby at one point as well. The mayor is playing poker with his criminal enterprise associates, and one of his associates is talking about how they need to get rid of Toxie, and there's a cut to Toxie being surrounded by all the criminals who unfortunately lived. But Toxie, of course, he fights them off, and Sarah is walking down the street at this point. It's very convoluted at this point, and just jumping back and forth in all these scenes. So it sounds like I'm jumping all over the place, but that's honestly how it plays out. It's really odd. And there's another uncomfortable sexual harassment scene where Sarah, she's walking down the street and accidentally hits a biker that's just sitting on his bike with her cane, because again, she's blind. And then their group of friends try to sexually harass her by holding up her skirt and everything. And just, again, there's a lot of very uncomfortable depictions of rape and sexual harassment. And Toxie, he shows up and scares them away, because she's like, you don't want to do this, you don't want to hurt me, because my boyfriend is really strong and he's going to come in and kill you. And they're just like mocking her. Oh, he's not. He's like, what kind of name is Melvin? He can't. A guy named Melvin can't do that. And then Toxie just ends up scaring them away. There's another love montage, and Toxie shows Sarah the toxic waste site home. And they basically live there now. And we're back at the health club, and Julie is about to work out, and she sits down at the locker room bench, and Toxie is hiding underneath the bench and ends up jumping out and scaring her, and attempts to choke her and kill her, but there's someone that ends up walking in on him, and there's a dramatic chase scene throughout, trying to go after Julie at this point, and Toxie is starting to kill Julie, but it cuts to a coked out Bozo again, freaking out that Julie hasn't shown up with the car. So what do these two assholes do? They rob an old lady across the street and steal her car. They beat the shit out of her too, and he's like, and this sort of reminded me of Clockwork Orange, whenever he walks up behind the old lady, and it sort of reminds me of that opening scene of Clockwork Orange where all of them just beat the fuck out of that old homeless guy. It sort of reminds me of that. It felt like an ode to it in a way. And Toxie, he shows up, and they try to run him over because Toxie jumps out in front of their car. Well, the stolen car, mind you. But Toxie, he ends up landing on the roof of the car as they try to hit him. Toxie ends up grabbing Slug and chokes him out until he bleeds, and then he throws him out of the car. Toxie eventually makes it back into the car and presses Bozo's foot down on the gas to go faster. There's a very long montage of them just fighting over the wheel. Eventually, Bozo tells Toxie to let Bozo drive and let him take the wheel. He says, you want the wheel? Okay. And then Toxie just rips the wheel out completely and throws it out the window. And there's eventually a unnecessary car crash where the car just blows up into flames. He soon emerges from the dramatic car crash as Bozo's body is laying on the ground, burned to dead. We're back at the laundry and dry cleaning service, where an old lady is asking the attendant, Mr. Wilson, who's played by Joe Zaro, if he can get the cum stains out of her son's pants. Well, grandson's pants, I guess. And Wilson notices a cop is giving him a parking ticket. And I forgot to mention that the lady is Mrs. Haskell, who is played by Norman Pratt. And she is a dwarf. It's kind of not really important, but it seems like she was a dwarf. And then Wilson, he runs up to the cop as Toxie walks in from behind Haskell to scare her, and he ends up throwing her and throws her into some machine and burns her face off with an iron. And this is when you think, oh no, Toxie, he's not killing just the evil anymore. He's killing the innocent too. And Toxie, he heads home to the Toxic waste dump as Sarah is waiting for him, and Toxie admits to Sarah that he's actually the monster hero that people are talking about. He thinks that Sarah should leave him, but she wants to stay. She refuses and wants to stay regardless. And they head back to Sarah's apartment, and there's a meeting with the mayor, and the mayor is saying that Toxie had killed an old innocent lady, but the secretary or Hitler sergeant, he says the old lady is actually the leader of a white nationalist supremacist group, and they, like, she has a long criminal record apparently. Like, okay, let's just throw that twist in there, why don't you? And the mayor wants his secretary to try to cover up her record to make it look like that she was just an innocent old lady. There's a group of supporters at the restaurant that comes back to the restaurant from earlier that got robbed in favor of not killing Toxie because the mayor wants Toxie to be killed. And there's a search team out to kill Toxie, and they find Toxie out in a field with Sarah in a bikini. As Sarah and him get into a tent, the Nazi sergeant or secretary under the mayor's control says Toxie has been spotted, and the mayor calls in for a National Guard backup. And he calls the governor to get that order in, and he says it's fine. And this is when the National Guardmen are now surrounding the tent with guns and tanks, but a crowd of supporters soon join them. Everyone is eventually telling the National Guard to not kill Toxie, as they order Toxie to come out of the tent as they have guns like pointing at him. The supporters, they all, including his mom, they all jump in front of Toxie, like trying to be the hostage basically, and saying, "You guys kill me before you kill Toxie." And the mayor is giving the orders to shoot Toxie at this point, as Toxie tells the supporters to move, but everyone backs down. And the mayor attempts to kill Toxie himself as Toxie starts to walk towards the mayor. Toxie says, "All right, you fat slob, let's see if you have any guts." And then he rips out the intestines of the mayor and eventually dies. And there's an annoying bit at the end where Sarah's just calling out Toxie's name. She's like, "Toxie." Toxie just responds, "Sarah." It's just like this back and forth over and over, when they're literally like not even 20 feet away, and they're just yelling out to each other, and they end up running towards each other, and everyone's cheering for Toxie, and Toxie kisses Sarah, and everyone's cheering Toxie on for killing the evil mayor. That's how the infamous Toxic Avenger ends. Man, I love this movie so much. I love this franchise. I mean, once you get to 3 and 4, it gets kind of out of hand. It's really hard to finish watching those two, but 1 and 2 are such great additions to this franchise. I honestly love watching 1 and 2 more than anything. Despite the really suggestive themes within this film, like the rape and depiction and sexual harassment and the racism and all of the typical things that Trauma is known for, I think this is a more tame Trauma film to start out with. I really don't recommend watching Poltergeist as your first Trauma film, or even necessarily Terror Firmer. Well, definitely don't watch Terror Firmer, because, like, if you're PC at all, politically correct, whatever, I don't think you would enjoy Terror Firmer. I'm a fairly political correct kind of guy, but I just sort of turn that switch off when I watch these movies, because I just know where Lloyd Kaufman is coming from and know about him, to where I don't get too upset about it. But some people, they don't have the ability to do that, so I really think that the Toxic Avenger is a good starting point for Trauma films, because it's probably the lesser offensive Trauma films out there, honestly. And again, not as bonkers as like his other films that he's known for. There's actually some continuity there, and there's somewhat of a story going off of the Toxic Avenger. As 3 and 4, they sort of deviate from that story, but 1 and 2, they definitely. It's like, again, Lloyd is trying to appeal to the masses and sort of like mainstream the Toxic Avenger and Trauma in a way at this point. And there's just something different about the Toxic Avenger, which makes it really special at this point in time as far as the Trauma filmography goes. And this film is just wonderful to watch, and the special effects are great too. Like and mind you, this is only on what I say $470,000 budget or whatever, and he was able to do all of this on that little bit of a budget. It's just incredible to me. I love this film so much. I know Troma's not for everybody, and for me, there's just something about Troma that just really reels me in. I don't like serious horror. I mentioned that on the show before. I don't like serious horror films at all. I don't like the feeling of having a nightmare before I go to sleep. So I like the little bit of comedy element to it as well. I love gory stuff. I love the comedy element added into it to sort of lighten the mood, because I feel like you need that in a horror film. I don't think it needs to be serious all the time, because even Halloween, it sort of has a comedy element to it, even though it's supposed to be like a serious slasher film. But I love the comedy element, especially in the early 80s with those early 80s horror films. They always had that comedy element. Everybody's just too goddamn serious now to add a little bit of comedy whatsoever to lighten the mood. I don't get it really. But honestly, yeah, I just love Troma for that aspect. Again, that was Toxic Avenger from 1986, directed by Lloyd Kaufman. And starting from April 29th to May 27th, I will be starting a new series called BreenVision. And I will be covering Neil Breen's first 3 films. And those films are Double Down from 2005, I Am Here Now from 2009, Fateful Findings from 2013. And eventually I will cover his most recent 3 at another time. And somehow this man is worse than Tommy Wiseau. I don't know how. He's somehow an even worse director, writer, producer, whatever. Worse than Tommy Wiseau, and even worse than Amir Shervan. I don't know how that's possible, but it is. And there's a lot of content to be covered, because these films are easily the shittiest films I've ever seen in my entire goddamn life. And that's saying a lot. That's all I got for you guys this week. If you want to go ahead and follow the show, you can go ahead and do so by following us on Twitter at CCMPod. You can follow us on Instagram at Cult Classic Mania. If you feel like supporting us monetarily, you can go ahead and do so by going to patreon.com/Cult Classic Mania. And again, if you feel like following the Avengers Podgame series along with the other podcasts that I'm working with, go ahead and check the guys over at Gorelords on 423, Slashers Podcast on 424, Terror Trio on 424 as well as Copulators Die First on 429. All of the podcasts that I just recently mentioned will be in the show notes for your viewing pleasure. And at the end of this episode, you can go ahead and listen to the trailer for Double Down, because I shit you not, you do not want to miss this trailer. You do not want to miss this film, because it is fucking terrible. And with all of that being said, I'm your host, Matthew, and this has been another installment of Cult Classic Mania. I'll talk to you guys next week.
We come in peace.
Fuck ass, give me a beer!
Yeah, welcome back to the cinema. This is not for the typical. Time to feed the occipital lobe with the films that I call my home. Buckle up, settle in, while we break it down a bit. Got a new take, make an old film relevant. But to give attention to the unsung revenants of the film industry, that's a wrap, let's riff.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Cult Classic Mania.
Las Vegas, where anything goes. Enjoy it while you can. I'm about to end it all. My name is Aaron Brand. I always thought I was doing the right thing and preparing for life. I was the first in my class in college in computer science. I joined the military and became a fighter pilot, and won many medals for distinguished service. I'm now a covert agent, a mercenary, for any nation that wants to control another. I don't need much to live on anymore. I just eat tuna out of the can and live in the car. I control access to anything and everything, even from my little simple, brilliant setup. My orders from another country are to shut down the Las Vegas Strip for 2 months. I've been given this great power, but I'm so alone without the girl I love. My girlfriend and I always wanted to have children.
I love you.
And now all of that's been taken away from me.
Confirmed.
Jeez. He is planning something very big. Bigger than 9/11 or any of the other larger catastrophes we caught in time after 9/11.
It's me. Give me the president. Contact has been made. Governments don't dare try to kill me.
Where does he go?
He's on a quest. Don't ask, he's protected.
You're a genius. The best. But you know that. No. This time, it's personal.
I can't forget her. Nor forgive them for what they did to us. Forgive me. Forgive me. It's starting now.
Marriage is over. Get out.
I've got the package. It's a setup. No sex. Don't ask how I found you. I know everything. It broke open. Run!
Holy shit, it's him!
So many questions. I'm so confused.
Can't go on with this. I can't go on with this. I'm an American. I'm an American. I love this country. It's my country. You're the one.
Our daughter Megan was just diagnosed with brain cancer. Oh no, I'm so sorry.
An assassination. We want to kill someone.
Ah!